If you're like me, you've probably had a few experiences where you've realized the movie you thought was an original idea was actually a book first. While in most instances you probably don't think too much about this, I found that there are certain situations where this is actually rather annoying. In these situations, my annoyance is almost always caused by two particular things. The first thing is that the book in question is almost always vastly superior to the movie that was based on it. And the second thing, and perhaps more importantly, is that the book almost always has its cultural impact undercut by the film. The reason for this is because modern audiences tend to believe that the film is the progenitor of the story in question. This means that the source material, and by extension the author, loses credit for bringing popular ideas into the mainstream. I recently had this experience again, and I figured that this would be a great opportunity to talk about a book and help bring it back into the spotlight. So, with that out of the way, let's get into talking about I Am Legend by Richard Matheson. Here we go. I Am Legend by Richard Matheson is a 1954 post-apocalyptic horror novel that tells the story of main character Robert Neville. In the story, Robert Neville finds himself as the lone survivor of a plague while trying to survive in the city of Los Angeles. Unfortunately, this plague has a secondary effect and turns those who are infected into bloodthirsty creatures. As the lone survivor, these bloodthirsty creatures are drawn to Robert Neville as he is potentially the only living person that they can feed upon. Since its creation, I Am Legend has had multiple adaptations, notably 1964's The Last Man on Earth, 1971's The Omega Man, and 2007's I Am Legend. The latter is the version of which most people watching this video will be familiar with, and, until recently, was the version I thought was a completely original story. While I've never seen the 2007 movie featuring Will Smith, and can't actually say whether it's any good, I do at least know the general plot from having seen the trailers and on clips online. From what I've been able to gather, the plot is very much the same overall, albeit with some pretty significant changes. The most important change comes in the form of the threat that Robert Neville faces. In the movie, it's essentially a form of mutated human that's turned into some sort of nocturnal beast that comes after him in the night. In the story, however, or I should say in the book, the threat is good old traditional vampires. Except not exactly. While the things in the book are most certainly vampires, it would be wrong to say they are traditional. I don't want to give too much away, but the main plot of I Am Legend has to do with Robert Neville's search into what exactly caused vampirism and whether or not there's truly a scientific reason behind it. If the plot of I Am Legend sounds familiar, it's probably because you haven't been living under a rock and have experienced the last few decades of zombie mania. TV shows like The Walking Dead and movies like 28 Days Later should immediately come to mind when hearing the plot of I Am Legend. This brings us back to the point I made earlier in the video about books not getting the credit they deserve. While most people are almost undoubtedly familiar with zombies and the zombie subgenre, most people are not familiar with the fact that I Am Legend, in its novel form, is really responsible for the entire subgenre's creation. Most people assume that the whole zombie craze started with George A. Romero's Night of the Living Dead. And while this is technically not untrue, what people don't realize is the fact that George A. Romero took great inspiration from Richard Matheson's I Am Legend. In essence, what George A. Romero did was to take Richard Matheson's novel and make two key changes. The first was that instead of showing the apocalypse after it already happened, he opted to show the zombie outbreak as it was first occurring. The second and most obvious other change was the fact that instead of there being vampires, there were, of course, zombies. While Romero also obviously had some other creative inputs in his story, it's important to realize the influence that I Am Legend had in the creation of Night of the Living Dead. And once you see this influence, it's easy then to follow those threads and see how I Am Legend has been influential in the creation of every other zombie story since. While it's undoubtedly true that a ton of people already know that I Am Legend is a novel and is highly influential in the creation of the zombie subgenre, it's my view that most people still believe that I Am Legend is nothing more, albeit maybe a good movie or not, a movie featuring Will Smith, and that if anything, it's a byproduct of the zombie subgenre as opposed to being an adaptation of the story that was responsible for its entire creation. Because of that, I really wanted to highlight this book and give it the credit that it deserves. And if this video can help more people become aware of it and maybe bring it back into the limelight a little bit, I think that makes it, this video that is, entirely worth making. Now that we've discussed the cultural impact of I Am Legend, the next thing to do is, of course, discuss, is the book any good? After all, even though a book may contain a unique setting that goes on to inspire other creators, it doesn't actually mean that the book has good characters, good dialogue, or really anything else that's good. Luckily, this isn't the case. Not only does I Am Legend have a unique setting, at least for the time, it has a wonderful main character, some great dialogue, and an ending that I think is very memorable. I think the story's greatest asset is the main character of Robert Neville. While Neville may not actually be in the worst situation ever conceived of in fiction, I'd put money that he's probably in the running for it. The story opens with Robert Neville going through his daily routine in preparation for when the vampires come out at night. While being the last person on Earth would already be a hellish enough experience in and of itself, it's made entirely worse by the fact that he knows there's a seemingly infinite amount of undead monsters that want to rip him apart. Richard Matheson does an excellent job of conveying the type of complex emotions a person would feel in this situation through the character of Robert Neville. Through Robert Neville, we see and feel the anxiety, the dread, the loneliness, and the confusion that this person feels and that any person would feel in this situation. Because of the inner turmoil and the overwhelming nature of the situation he finds himself in, Robert Neville often struggles with determining what the best course of action actually is, and he ultimately struggles with wondering if it's even worth to go on if he's the last person on Earth. This makes Robert Neville immediately sympathetic, and you want to see him succeed, but at the same time, you also understand why he would want to give up and kind of just drown his sorrows in a bottle of alcohol. He's a great character, and again, I think Richard Matheson does a really great job of really, really conveying, just like the frustration that a person would feel in this situation, and it's definitely one of the book's strongest aspects. Aside from its unique setting and main character, the other element of I Am Legend that I believe is worth making note of that makes the story great is its memorable ending. While I don't want to go into too much spoilers here, I think the ending is definitely something that the average reader won't see coming, and it will stick with them long after they put the book down. After I finished I Am Legend, I was left with a sort of mixed set of emotions. On one hand, I thought the ending could be seen as somewhat optimistic, but on the other hand, I also thought there was a sort of tragedy to it. Like I said, because I don't want to provide spoilers here, it's going to be a little bit hard to say why, and I'm going to be a little bit vague. But I guess the best way to explain it would be it's like, it seems as though there was hope for mankind, but at the same time, what might come next would be worse than what came before in mankind's history. Regardless as to whether or not you think the ending of I Am Legend is optimistic or pessimistic, there's undoubtedly a sense of loss that comes with its conclusion. And I think this worked perfectly for a story like I Am Legend. After all, this is a story of grim survival in a world dominated by bloodthirsty vampires. I don't think a happy ending would exactly work for a story like this, although, maybe your opinion differs from mine. I think the ending we do get concludes the story perfectly, and it actually has some pretty iconic lines, which again, I can't get into too much detail, that really solidify the ending into your memory. Um, I think that once you actually get this book, pick it up, read it, and get to the ending, you'll see what I'm talking about, and it'll definitely be something that sticks with you after you've put the book down, just like it did with me. So yeah, that about sums up what I wanted to say about I Am Legend. It's a great horror book with an interesting main character, a unique setting, again, at least for the time, and an ending that I believe is iconic and will stick with most readers for long after they finish the story. It should go without saying that I highly recommend it, especially for horror fans, and especially for those of you who want to see how the zombie post-apocalyptic subgenre really got its start. This is James with the Paragon Chronicles, and I'll see you next time.